There's a version of Hollywood that still lives in people's minds. Polished, glowing, untouchable. Black and white frames. Perfect smiles. Men in tailored suits and women lit like constellations. The Golden Age. A time when stars weren't just famous. They were manufactured myths. Controlled. Protected. Immortal. But every system built on perfection requires silence. And silence has a cost. In interviews over the years, Spike Lee has returned again and again to one idea. Hollywood didn't just tell stories, it hid them. Especially the uncomfortable ones. Especially the ones about power. Because behind the velvet curtains and carefully staged publicity photos, there were actors who weren't just complicated. They were feared. Respected publicly. Avoided privately. Protected institutionally. Not cartoon villains. Not monsters in the obvious sense. But men, and sometimes women, whose behavior blurred lines. Who exploited power. Who manipulated systems designed to protect them. Who left behind stories that never quite made it into the official narrative. And when you start pulling at those threads, the Golden Age begins to look less like a dream, and more like a controlled illusion. This isn't about tearing down legends. It's about understanding them fully. Because some of Hollywood's most celebrated icons carried shadows that were never meant to be seen. And the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to look away. Actor 1. Errol Flynn. If there was ever a face built for myth, it was Errol Flynn. He wasn't just a star. He was the embodiment of adventure. Swashbuckling heroes. Sword fights. Effortless charm. He didn't act like a hero. He was one, at least on screen. Off screen, things were less controlled. Flynn's reputation during his lifetime was already complicated. He was known for heavy drinking, volatile behavior, and an appetite for excess that went far beyond what studios could comfortably manage. But those were the public-facing flaws. The kind that could be spun into a rebellious persona. The deeper concerns were harder to package. In 1942, Flynn was tried for statutory rape involving 2 underage girls. It became one of the most widely publicized celebrity trials of its time. He was ultimately acquitted, but the case left a permanent stain on his legacy. What's important here isn't just the verdict, it's the context. The trial revealed a culture where access to young women was normalized for powerful men in Hollywood. Parties, private yachts, industry gatherings, spaces where lines blurred, and accountability was almost non-existent. Some accounts from that period suggest Flynn's behavior wasn't an anomaly, it was just more visible. Biographers and historians have since debated the extent of his actions, with some arguing that the case was inflated by media sensationalism, while others point to a pattern of predatory behavior that extended beyond what was legally proven. Even the phrase, "in like Flynn," entered popular culture, originally implying effortless success, but later interpreted by some as a darker reference to his reputation with women. Psychologically, Flynn presents a familiar profile. Charisma masking instability. A man whose identity was built around conquest, on screen and off. But the industry didn't reject him. It adapted around him. Warner Brothers continued to cast him. Audiences continued to watch him. The myth held. Because at that time, the system wasn't designed to ask moral questions. It was designed to maintain profitability. And as long as Flynn remained valuable, the machine kept moving. Actor 2. John Wayne. John Wayne wasn't just an actor. He was an idea. A symbol of American masculinity, strength, certainty, moral clarity. For decades, he represented a version of the country that was confident, dominant, and unquestioned. But off-screen, Wayne's legacy is far more complicated. Unlike Flynn, whose controversies were rooted in personal behavior, Wayne's issues were ideological and deeply tied to power. In a 1971 interview with Playboy, Wayne made a series of statements about race, Native Americans, and American history that have since been widely criticized. He expressed beliefs in white supremacy in certain contexts and justified the displacement of native populations in terms that reflected a colonial mindset. At the time, these views weren't universally condemned, especially within Hollywood's power circles. But that doesn't make them neutral. It makes them revealing. Wayne wasn't just expressing personal opinions. He was reinforcing a narrative that Hollywood had helped build for decades. Western films, many of which he starred in, often portrayed indigenous people as antagonists and erased the complexities of American expansion. Spike Lee has frequently challenged this version of cinematic history, pointing out how film doesn't just reflect culture, it shapes it. And Wayne was one of its most influential figures. There were also reports from colleagues describing him as difficult, controlling, and dismissive toward those who challenged him. On set, he was known to assert dominance, not just through performance, but through presence. Again, not unusual for the time. But when combined with his cultural influence, it becomes something more significant. Wayne wasn't operating in the shadows. He was operating in plain sight, which raises a different kind of question. What happens when the system doesn't hide behavior? Because it agrees with it. Unlike Flynn, Wayne's legacy wasn't damaged during his lifetime. It was preserved, celebrated. Only later did the reassessment begin. Not because new evidence emerged, but because the cultural lens changed. And suddenly, what was once normalized began to look unsettling. Actor 3. Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy didn't look like a Hollywood myth. He wasn't built on spectacle or excess. His performances were restrained, controlled, almost internal. He didn't dominate the screen. He grounded it. That was his appeal. Audiences trusted him. Studios relied on him. And off-screen, that same sense of stability became part of his public identity. Dependable, professional, morally centered. But that version of Spencer Tracy was only part of the truth. Behind the image, there was a long, documented struggle with alcoholism. Not occasional drinking, but sustained dependency that affected his work, his relationships, and his ability to function consistently. There were periods where productions had to adjust around him. Delays were explained away. Absences were managed quietly. The studio didn't confront the issue publicly. It contained it. Because Tracy was valuable. And value in that system determined visibility. His personal life was equally complex. Though married, Tracy maintained a decades-long relationship with Katharine Hepburn, one of the most iconic partnerships in Hollywood history. But it was carefully controlled. Publicly, the relationship was never fully acknowledged during his lifetime. Privately, it was understood. The arrangement existed in a kind of silent agreement between studios, press, and those close to them. Not because it was scandalous by today's standards, but because it conflicted with the image being sold. Tracy was meant to represent moral clarity, stability, order, and anything that complicated that narrative was managed. There are accounts from colleagues describing Tracy as intense, sometimes withdrawn, occasionally volatile, particularly during periods of heavy drinking. Not explosive in the way some of his contemporaries were, but unpredictable in a quieter, more internal way. And that unpredictability was never allowed to define him publicly. This is where his story becomes less about individual behavior and more about institutional design. Because Tracy wasn't hidden. He was protected. His struggles didn't disappear. They were absorbed into a system that knew how to preserve the version of him that audiences needed to see. Spike Lee has often pointed out that Hollywood doesn't just erase problems. It reframes them. In Tracy's case, the narrative became one of quiet brilliance, emotional depth. A man who carried weight internally, translating it into performance. And maybe that's true. But it also leaves out something essential. That the same system capable of hiding misconduct was equally capable of hiding suffering. Psychologically, Tracy represents a different kind of complexity. Not dominance, not exploitation, but deterioration, managed, contained, and never fully acknowledged. And it raises a subtle but important question. When a system protects someone, is it protecting them, or protecting itself? Actor 4. Edward G. Robinson. If Spencer Tracy represents the side of Hollywood that was quietly protected, Edward G. Robinson represents something else entirely. What happens when that protection disappears? Robinson was one of the defining faces of early gangster cinema. Sharp, intelligent, controlled. His performances carried a kind of precision that made him unforgettable. He wasn't just successful. He was established, respected, secure, until the system shifted. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Hollywood entered one of its most unstable periods, the Red Scare. Political pressure intensified. Loyalty became currency. Suspicion became evidence. And suddenly, The same industry that had once elevated its stars began to scrutinize them. Robinson found himself caught in that shift. He was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, questioned about alleged connections to communist organizations. Like many at the time, his name had been associated, often loosely, with groups that were later deemed politically suspect. There was no clear proof of wrongdoing. But in that environment, proof wasn't always necessary. Association was enough. Robinson cooperated. He testified. He named organizations he had been involved with, many of which he stated he no longer supported. But the damage had already begun. Roles became less frequent. Opportunities narrowed. His standing in the industry shifted, not dramatically at first, but noticeably. What makes Robinson's story particularly revealing is that he wasn't defiant in the way some others were. He tried to adapt, to comply, to survive within the system. And still, it wasn't enough. This is where the contrast becomes sharp. Because while some figures were shielded, despite behavior, despite controversy, others were exposed, scrutinized, and gradually pushed aside. Not necessarily because they had done more, but because the system needed examples, needed alignment, needed control. Spike Lee has often explored how power structures maintain themselves not just through protection, but through selective punishment. Robinson became part of that mechanism. A respected actor, repositioned as a risk. Not through confirmed action, but through implication. And once that shift happens in Hollywood, it's difficult to reverse. Psychologically, Robinson's experience reflects something different from the others we've seen. Not excess, not dominance, but vulnerability to a system that no longer sees you as essential. His story forces a different kind of question. Not just what Hollywood protects, but what it's willing to sacrifice. Actor 5. Ronald Reagan. By the time Ronald Reagan became one of the most recognizable figures in American politics, his Hollywood years had already been carefully archived, cleaned, simplified, and repackaged. But during the 1930s and 1940s, Reagan wasn't just an actor. He was an insider, a contract player at Warner Brothers, president of the Screen Actors Guild, and a man who understood, intimately, how influence moved through Hollywood, and more importantly, how fear could be used to shape it. During his tenure as SAG president in the late 1940s, Hollywood was entering one of its most volatile periods, the Red Scare. Communism wasn't just a political concern, it became an industry-wide obsession. Careers were destroyed over suspicion. Writers, directors, and actors were blacklisted, often without clear evidence, without due process, and without recourse. Reagan's role during this period has been debated for decades. He testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee, WAC, expressing concerns about communist influence in Hollywood unions. He also served as an FBI informant under the code name T-10, providing information about individuals he believed might be politically subversive. To some, Reagan was protecting the industry. To others, he was participating in a system that punished dissent and encouraged surveillance. What makes this particularly complex is that Reagan didn't operate in secrecy alone. He operated with legitimacy. The fear of communism was real, widely shared, and politically reinforced. Studios cooperated. Executives complied. And many individuals, whether out of belief, pressure, or self-preservation, became part of the mechanism. But the consequences were severe. Careers ended overnight. Reputations were destroyed based on association. Silence became survival. And Reagan moved forward. His career didn't suffer. In fact, his public profile grew. The image of stability, patriotism, and moral clarity that he projected during this period would later become central to his political identity. Spike Lee has often explored how institutions rewrite themselves over time. How actions that were once controversial are reframed as necessary, even heroic. Reagan's story sits directly inside that tension. Was he acting out of conviction? Was he navigating a system that demanded alignment? Or was he benefiting from a climate where accusation carried more weight than evidence? There's no single answer. But what's clear is this. Reagan wasn't just shaped by Hollywood. He helped shape its culture of fear. And in doing so, he became part of a system where power wasn't just about fame. It was about control over who didn't get to speak. Actor 6. Joan Crawford. If Reagan's story is about institutional power, Joan Crawford's is something more intimate, more internal, more difficult to verify, and yet impossible to ignore. Crawford was one of the most iconic actresses of the Golden Age. Rising from poverty to become an MGM superstar, she built her career on discipline, reinvention, and relentless control over her image. She didn't just survive Hollywood, she mastered it. But behind that control, there were long-standing rumors, and later, direct allegations, about her behavior in private life. The most widely known account comes from her adopted daughter, Christina Crawford, whose memoir Mommy Dearest portrayed Joan Crawford as emotionally and physically abusive. The book describes a household governed by fear, unpredictability, and strict, often harsh discipline. After its release, the response was deeply divided. Some in Hollywood dismissed the memoir as exaggerated or motivated by personal conflict. Others, friends, colleagues, and observers, acknowledged that Crawford could be controlling, volatile, and intensely demanding. But very few accounts from the time directly confronted the possibility of abuse. And that silence is significant, because unlike public controversies or political actions, domestic behavior was even easier to conceal. There were no cameras inside the home, no studio oversight, no public relations strategy, only testimony. And testimony, especially from children, was often dismissed, particularly when it conflicted with a powerful public image. Crawford's image was one of strength, precision, elegance. But according to Christina's account, that same need for control extended into her personal life in ways that were damaging and, at times, frightening. Historians still debate the extent and accuracy of these claims. Some argue that the truth lies somewhere between extremes, that Crawford was neither the monster portrayed in the memoir nor the flawless icon presented by the studio. But again, the pattern emerges. A powerful figure, a controlled image, and a private reality that, whether fully documented or not, raises uncomfortable questions. Spike Lee has often said that the most dangerous stories are the ones people refuse to examine. Not because they're false, but because they're complicated. Crawford's story sits in that space. Not easily proven, not easily dismissed, and never fully resolved.